What's up, everybody? I want to talk a little bit about let's be honest, a hit piece put out recently by Inside Edition about truckers. The thing is, the stories that they covered, they were honest about the stories that they covered. They weren't lying about the stories, but they twisted the truth using those stories to completely lie about the trucking industry. Now, there are bad drivers out here. And not all the bad drivers out here are actually bad drivers because they're bad drivers. There's two kind of bad drivers out here. A small percentage of the bad drivers are just they don't belong on the road completely. They do not belong on the road. But they're a very small percentage. What's left of those bad drivers is because of mostly these big mega companies, these really big trucking companies, that they have inadequate training programs for drivers. They take the drivers, they go through the school. I mean, even where I went to a decent school. I was in school for 3 months to get my CDL. I mean, I did a month and a half of online schooling, just learning regulations, learning about bill of ladings, learning how to use logbooks, all the paper stuff. And then I spent another month and a half on campus actually learning to drive the truck and learning about emergency situations. And, it was hands on driving, mostly on a closed course, but we did go out once a week on the road. But in total, I spent 3 months schooling to get my CDL. Most schools, it's 3 weeks. But that's not even the problem. Even the schools that are 3 weeks, that's not the problem. I mean, if that 3 weeks was dedicated to just teaching the driver how to operate the truck, especially because right now there's a mix out here. You got a lot of auto shifts. My new truck is an auto shift. But, when I started, they were mostly all standards, and it's about 50-50 now, probably. Maybe 40-60, 40% autos. But it's becoming the norm to have autos. But still, every person who's trained in a truck, they should be learning on a stick. That's why, if you get your license on an automatic, you can't drive a stick. You actually get a restriction. It's an auto restriction on your license. But that's not the big problem either. The problem is these drivers, they come out of these schools and they go to these big companies, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but you know them. You see these trucks all the time. Come work for us and get your own truck and da-da-da and da-da-da and da-da-da. And the problem with these companies is, one, most leases, it's a con game. And the worst part is the con game is actually targeting these people that are coming out of the schools. What happens is you have a driver, they come out of the school, they go to a company, then, they go out with somebody that's a trainer for 2 or 3 weeks, and their trainer has only been driving a truck for 3 or 4 months, sometimes 6 months. Somebody who's been driving a truck for 6 months is not a trainer. Somebody who's been driving a truck for 2 years, there's always an exception to the rule. I was one of them people that at 2 years I could have trained somebody, but I would have not been a great trainer, but I could have adequately trained somebody. At 5 years, I was a good trainer. I could be a good trainer. And today, I could definitely be a good trainer. I've been driving now for almost 12 years. But when you got a rookie training a completely green rookie, you wind up with this chaos that's going on out here. That's the number one issue. That's where these bad drivers are coming from. It's not always the driver's fault. The drivers aren't bad drivers because they're idiots the majority of the time. Like I said, there are some out here. It's obvious. It's probably about 10%, maybe 15%. But, you know, that brings up the other issue here. This hit piece, and it was a hit piece. It was completely fabricated. Like I said, the stories that they told, where the people that they used, that was truth. But they used it to lie about the industry overall. Because, see these here? These are dash cams. I got 2 in my truck because I want my front of my truck completely covered. But those are dash cams. Since they put dash cams in trucks, here's what happened. Truck drivers used to be found at fault for accidents on average 80% of the time. It was always the truck driver's fault. Doesn't matter. You could have witnesses. You could have had 30 different people out there said, no, the guy in the car did this and da-da-da, and it was the truck driver's fault. It didn't matter what people said. It didn't matter what the truck driver said. It was the truck driver's fault. I worked for a company where they were found at fault something like 80% of the time also for accidents. They put dash cams in their trucks. Once they had the whole fleet with dash cams in them, after a year, they were found not at fault 85% of the time. 85% of the time. From 80% of the time at fault to 85% of the time not at fault. Because here's the issue. Yeah, we're professionals. We're supposed to know more than the average Joe in his car, because we're taught to drive. The average Joe is taught to commute. The average Joe is taught accelerator, brake, steer left and right. They're not even, most of them don't even know, and they aren't even taught up for right, down for left. If you don't know what that means, I rest my case. If you do know what that means, go ahead and laugh, because it is funny, but it's the reality. And since the cameras have become an industry standard, most companies, most of the time, anybody who has a dash cam in their truck, they're almost guaranteed to be found not at fault for an accident. It's over 80% of the time. If you have a dash cam in your truck, over 80% of the time, you're found not at fault for the accident. If you don't have a dash cam in the truck, it's around 80% of the time that you are found at fault for the accident because you don't have that evidence. But the issue is, you have people out there, like I said, they're not taught how to drive to begin with. They're not taught what the interstate is. That's where most of the accidents happen with big trucks. I mean, they happen, all over because trucks, we deliver everywhere. But most of the accidents happen on the interstate. And they happen because of people that don't understand how to operate a vehicle on the interstate. They don't know how to properly merge. They don't know how to properly exit. They don't know how to, like I said, up for right, down for left. So you never know where they're going. They're just zigzagging all over the place. No clue what they're doing. You have people that, like in California, you have a 5-lane stretch of highway, and they're over there in the 5th lane. And then they just come flying across traffic, cutting everybody off at the very last instant to get off in the exit. And most of the time, it's a car or, some kind of passenger vehicle that sets off the chain of events that causes the accident. I mean, like even down there in Texas with that ice storm, everybody was saying, well, truck drivers should know better to be on the road in the weather like that. Well, we're trained to be on the weather like that. We're trained to know how to properly handle a vehicle out in the weather like that. The problem is, the people that aren't trained, they think they're supposed to be out in the weather like that. And the whole chain of events started because of somebody in a car driving too fast on the ice, and then once that happened, it created a chain event. So, that's what's happening out here. And that whole thing by Inside Edition, I'm calling Inside Edition out. I'm calling them out, because it's a completely fabricated hit piece. What they said about those accidents that they used as their features, that's the truth. I'm not going to say that they were lying about that. What happened with those accidents? But the problem is that they use them accidents to create a false narrative. It's a false truth. It is not the reality. Because like I said, these cameras prove, and even lawsuit lawyers, these ambulance chasers, they want these out of trucks now. They fought to get these in trucks because they figured it would just make it easier for them to win cases because, they were used to trucks being always found at fault for accidents, and it completely backfired on them because now all these ambulance chasers, there's a lot of them that are going out of business because they can't make money off the trucks anymore. Because they're used to just saying, oh, well, this is what the guy in the car says happened, and that's the way it happened. Plain and simple. And now, with video evidence like that, they can't lie anymore. And even with the trucks, people don't realize, trucks and cars, they have these little black boxes in them now. It's mandated by the government, but it's been in the cars for a long time. Pretty much every single car from 2014 and up or 2015 and up, somewhere in there, they all have the black boxes now. But, the higher end your car was, the more likely it was to have a black box in it. Like, for example, you can go all the way back, I think it's back to 1989, Mercedes and BMWs had these black boxes in them. Acura in the 90s had the black boxes in them. I'm not sure about Hondas, maybe the high-end Honda, like the Accord, that might have had the black box in it. But most Hondas, I don't think, had the black box in them in the 90s. It came later on as they started becoming more and more. But like my 97 Acura has a black box in it. And it records. If I slam on the brakes, it records the events for up to a couple minutes. But in a lot of cases, it's 30, 40, 50 seconds. Some of them it's 90 seconds. Some of them, it's 2 minutes. Some are 3 minutes. It depends on how their box is set up. But they record the events that happen. And so even the black boxes collaborate what these cameras are saying. Because the black box shows that the car made an aggressive turn, meaning it cut something off and slammed on the brakes. It's all there on the black box. When you see that aggressive turn and then the aggressive braking, and then that vehicle was involved with an accident with one of these getting rear-ended, that black box tells the truth. And the black box, even if these don't have cameras, when you put them two black boxes together, the black box still tells the truth about these trucks. And that's another thing. Even without the camera, you need a good lawyer on your side. Unfortunately, most trucking companies, they have good lawyers, and since they got to fight to defend themselves, they go and they get a subpoena to get the information off that black box right away, and everything matches up. And then you know who's telling the truth, or you know who's lying, or you know if both of them are stretching the truth, because the black boxes don't lie. And that's what's going, but the majority of the accidents, it's been found and it's proven. It's factual. The majority of the accidents out here happening with these big trucks, it's set in motion by a passenger vehicle most of the time. That is a complete lie, what they're saying about on that hit piece. And then you still have times where that doesn't even matter. They're still blaming truck drivers. Look at the case. I'm no friend of Werner. I pick on Werner all the time, but the one thing that I did defend Werner on, and I still defend Werner on, was that big lawsuit that they got hit with. Guy driving down the road, I think he was going east, and the other vehicle was coming west. Lady put a bunch of kids in her pickup truck made for 3 people, and she's got herself and 4 or 5 kids in the truck. Most of them weren't strapped in. She's out in weather that she didn't belong in because she doesn't know how to drive in the snow and ice and this and that. And she comes flying off of an exit ramp, loses control of her vehicle, comes flying across the interstate, comes flying across the median, and hits a truck head on. And they blame the truck. Made no sense. And they actually won the lawsuit. I'm sure it went to appeal. I don't know what happened with it since then, but I'm sure it's gone to appeal, because you can't blame a truck driver for something that is not in his control. I mean, most of us are Smith certified. It depends on the company you went with. When I trained with a company called Knight Transportation before they merged with Swift. And they had a really good training program. I was out with a experienced driver for 3 months training. And then for the next year and a half, almost 2 years, I was in what they call the Squire program. I could call my trainer anytime I needed. I could call my dispatcher anytime I needed. There was always somebody there on the phone for even just the most minor thing. Even something that, as an experienced driver, we look at it, we're like, oh my God, that's so stupid. But for a rookie, it's a big deal. And there was always somebody there for me to contact. And that's the kind of training program that these companies should be having. But they don't have them like that. Like I said, they're just putting them out with they're putting non-experienced drivers out with barely experienced drivers. And that's training. So, there's multiple layers to the issues that are going on here. But the biggest issue is the fact that people aren't taught how to drive on the interstate in their passenger vehicle. Most people don't even know what the interstate is. I'm going to tell you what the interstate is, and most of you, it's going to blow your mind because they don't teach this in school anymore. I was taught this in elementary school. I was taught this as a kid in elementary school. I've lived in New York since I was 9 or 10 years old, and I learned this in New Jersey in elementary school. The interstate is actually the National Defense Highway. That's what the interstate was built for. It's a National Defense Highway. The very first objective of the interstate is to move the armed forces around the country on land as quickly as possible. That's the number one objective of the interstate. The second objective of the interstate is to move emergency vehicles for local governments as quickly and efficiently as possible. Because the interstate is designed for military vehicles, the third function of the interstate is to move commerce and grow the economy. The very last function of the interstate, which is another problem because we have people that are not designing, when they change things with the interstate, they're not designing them properly anymore. The very last function and the most unimportant function of the interstate is to move passenger vehicles. For passenger vehicles to get around the country at a faster rate and to move around easier. That is the most unimportant function of the interstate, is to move a car from point A to point B. And the problem is, you have people that are making laws and people that are designing on-ramps and off-ramps and all this other junk, and they're designing it all for cars. And that's creating mayhem also, because the interstate was not designed for cars. The only reason that the interstates are allowed on the road is because, Eisenhower had enough foresight to understand, we need taxes to pay for the roads. We want states to maintain their parts of the interstate so that, it makes it easier on the federal government because, but that's why the federal government gives them grants. It's to maintain the interstate so that when the military, God forbid we were ever invaded, that's what the military is used for. That's what that interstate is used for, is for the military, to dispatch the military. It's to get the military from one side of the country to the other side of the country, from north to south, from south to north, whatever it be, at the fastest possible way. But you have designers that are designing the interstate now, when they're modifying the interstate, with cars in mind. They're completely screwing up the function of the interstate. They're screwing up, because they're screwing up the function of the interstate, they're screwing up the safety of the interstate. And then you have lawmakers that are like out in California. I drive out in California. That's one of my favorite places to go because I like going across the Midwest. I love going through the Rockies. California, though, it could be a headache. And one of the biggest dangers in California is the way they have their whole highway set up. They have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit for trucks. Meanwhile, they got people out there doing 70 miles an hour in a car. And these people that are supposed to be smarter than the rest of us have no comprehension as to how dangerous that is. They think that's safe. That is not safe. Like I said, I learned this in elementary school. The whole point of a speed limit on the interstate, especially on the interstate, it's called flow of traffic. When you have traffic going 55 miles an hour and you have other traffic going 70 miles an hour, that's no different than being on a 55-mile-an-hour road and people speeding at 70 miles an hour. It's the same exact danger. And then California, you know all that congestion that you're hitting out there in California? That's California's fault. California, all the politicians out there, they're creating all that congestion out there in California. They create it. You know how they create it? Because of the way that they put the trucks. You have a 5-lane highway. I got a ticket for this. They have a 5-lane highway. They have the trucks in 2 lanes, the right 2 lanes. You're only allowed to use the right 2 lanes. If you have 5 lanes of highway, even if you have 3 lanes of highway, we'll use 3 lanes of highway for a perfect example of this. When you have 3 lanes of highway, if you're going through and you're in a commercial vehicle, you should be in the 2nd lane. You should be in the 2nd lane. Why should you be in the 2nd lane? Because you avoid traffic that is merging and exiting. The traffic that is exiting, they're going to be slowing down to get off on the exit. Traffic that is merging, a lot of the people, they don't know how to properly merge. If you're in that right lane, you don't have to worry about getting on your brakes hard because somebody's trying to merge on a highway at 30 miles an hour while you're doing 55 and you have traffic around you doing 70. When you have a 5-lane highway, it should be that the trucks, with the exception of exiting, they should be in the 2nd and 3rd lane. Because again, you're missing that merge and exit lane. When you have 4 lanes, the trucks should be in the 2nd and 3rd lane so that they're missing that exit lane. That's where most of your accidents happen. And that is why you have most of your congestion. Because these trucks, even mine, I got a truck that, you know, it's a strong truck. But even still, it takes a mile to get this truck up to 60 miles an hour. And so when you're in stop and go traffic and you have all the trucks stuck over there where traffic is trying to merge in, and you got 3 lanes over here with no traffic at all, and you got all this chaos going over here in this 2 lanes, most of your congestion is happening because the trucks are being forced to stop, then slowly get up to the speed limit again and stop before they even get to the speed. And it just creates this whole chain reaction where you wind up with all this congestion. So, you know, there's multiple factors that are going on here that creates so many issues on the highway. And when you get in a situation like that, because most people in passenger vehicles, they're not trained to actually handle the stress of being on an interstate. They're the ones that start getting all ticked off, and then they start doing really stupid stuff around the trucks because they're blaming the trucks, even though the people that they're putting in office are the ones creating this situation that they're getting mad at the trucks for. And then they start cutting off trucks. They start cut off the truck and slam on the brakes in front of the truck because you're ticked off because the truck was holding you up. And then you wind up with this chain reaction accident out there, and then everybody wants to blame the trucks. You know, most of the time it's not the truck's fault. And there's a lot of things that are happening out there that are ticking off all of you in your cars that it's not our fault. We're not the morons that don't know how the interstate works. And I'm not blaming people in their cars for not knowing how the interstate works because, you know, They should have been taught this in school. I was taught this in school when I was a kid. I don't know why they don't teach this in school anymore. It's a real life necessity. Most people, when they grow up, they're going to drive a car. They should be taught in school what the interstate is, what the interstate function is, and what the interstate is designed for, so that when they're adults and they're on the interstate, they can keep their cool because they understand what's going on in the interstate. And then when they see all these signs and they realize what their lawmakers are doing, they understand that how much of this is actually their lawmakers' fault. It's the morons that are chauffeured around and think they know how to drive on the interstate when they don't even drive their own vehicle. And so they think they know how to make the interstate safer, and they're only making it more dangerous. So, there's a lot of things going on out there, but that whole thing by Inside Edition, it was a hit piece. They told the truth about a couple stories. That was obvious. I mean, when you heard what happened and you look into the investigative reports and everything, what they said was true. But it led to a false truth, which was the intent of their narrative. The narrative was not meant to be honest. It was never meant to be honest, because they flat out lied using truths. They flat out lied about truck drivers in the trucking industry. And you need to know that everything that they said to you about truckers being out of control, that's a rarity. It's an extreme rarity.